My guest is Robin Hill. And Robin Hill is here to talk to us about why it is so hard to get information in the right level when we are doing reporting solutions for clients. Robin is an experienced, well, actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to let Robin give a little bit of history about her background in reporting and analytics.
Thanks, Chuck, so much. And welcome, everybody. Welcome, listeners. Welcome, viewers, however you're coming to our podcast. We really appreciate you, and we're glad you're here. A little bit about me. If you look on our slide, I have been in data and data warehousing and business intelligence since 1997. And during that time, I still find it so amazing that in the last 28 years, reporting still isn't any easier. So today I just want to kind of share with everybody, what it is, why it's so difficult. When somebody comes to us and says, I need a report, I need a dashboard, I need a KPI, why is it still so difficult? So it's, ironic to me that when I work for clients in different businesses, that I still hear the same thing over and over. Just a little bit about my background. I started out as an ETL programmer. ETL is extract, transform, load. So my job was to pull data out of back-end operational systems like your timesheet reporting or your customer file or your vendor file. And I would pull the information out, clean it, and then present it. I would load it to a space where people could then do reports. Back when I started, it was very manual, a lot of, writing COBOL, a lot of writing different code to pull that out. Now, fast forward to today, we have a lot of great tools that are drag and drop, and it seems like we should still be able to get our information and get it what we need faster and easier. And what we're going to talk about today is why there's still not quite there yet. AI or artificial intelligence may get us there if we start to train AI on these issues that we're going to discuss in our podcast.
Awesome. That's a great introduction. And if you couldn't tell by Robin describing her history, she's well-versed in this topic. So I thought she'd be a great guest to walk people through the exercises that go into getting reporting in place. I think everybody thinks of reporting as an afterthought. Normally it's associated with some net new, product that we're creating in the IT space. And there's a lot of things that you have to consider from a data governance standpoint as you're building technology solutions that ultimately result in clean data and clean reporting that's accurate and not only accurate, sustainable, and relevant to the business users once you implement a new product or solution. So without further ado, let's get into the presentation deck and kind of walk our listeners through just the process of, what we call getting from I want reporting down to what do you actually want to know, the questions behind the questions, right?
That's right. Well, the questions behind the questions, and then more importantly, how are you going to use the data? How is the business going to use the data once we give it to them? What I find, Chuck, is that so many people will come to me and say, yep, I need this thing, I need this report. And then what I find is I forget to ask, or technicians forget to ask you, what are you going to do with it? Mm-hmm. And that's so critical and it's so key, because then the business will tell you, or the consumer of the information, oh, well, I'm then going to take your report, I'm going to download it into Excel, and then I'm going to add it to this other data I have so it makes sense. Well, if I knew that ahead of time, I would go get that data for you that you're adding to it. So it just becomes a more of an uncover, discover conversation, right? So a lot of people just stop at, I get this report. So instead, with the approach that we're going to talk about today, we take it a little further and we help prevent a lot of rework. We have this approach also helps prevent going back to the business and asking them the same questions over and over, right? We hear that complaint a lot too. So what do we have next?
Yes. So moving right along. All right. So you want to explain what a vignette is?
Yeah, yeah. So you say vignette, I say vignette. It really just whatever. It just depends. But
I
yeah, I like.
mispronounce tons of stuff, but go ahead and educate the folks, and maybe I'll get it together by the end of this recording.
So one of the things that clients will hire me to do is do workshops, facilitate eliciting requirements and different things like that. And one of the things over the years I found to be very effective is using what I call a vignette approach to getting meaningful information requirements. Now, I know that sounds great, right? Like everybody goes in with the intention of getting meaningful requirements. But there is a little trick, and hopefully what we're going to discuss today will help you get there. So if we go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and talk about the vignette, where I'm going to go ahead and use a real easy for me to say, real world example for you. But I love data. So if you go to what the definition of a vignette is, it actually has been around since the mid 1700s. The reason I'm adding this fun slide is just because I'm a data girl. I love data and I need to know everything about everything. What we're going to focus on here is a couple of different descriptions. It's a brief verbal description. It can be of a person, place, or a short, descriptive, or evocative episode in a play. That's what a vignette was in the mid 1700s. It is French. Then we do borrow from the French language. It's not a common word. And this is where, for me, information gets exciting. It's interesting for me to know that in written English, vignette only occurs one time per million words. So not a very common word for sure. But to get the meaningful information, I want to focus on this part of the published definition. So for me, a vignette is a short, descriptive episode, and it will focus on improving data and information retrieval and understanding across the enterprise. So you can use this vignette approach for any kind of requirements, but for me, it really is most effective and valuable if you're going to be providing information that spans more than one area, role, or department. So I like to use this when I'm talking for enterprise-wide metrics, but can also be used for department or, but you just don't want to use it for one-offs probably. But let's go ahead and look into why I say that. So as our vignette for today, I'm going to use an approach that Agile methodology uses, which is a little bit of a user story or storytelling type of setup, if you will. So in this case, our vignette for today is as a CFO, so as a chief operating officer of a small consulting firm, I want to fully understand the utilization of my billable resources. I want to understand this at the enterprise level, and I want to be alerted to any potential employee retention issues in an effort to decrease hiring costs. So this is a very real world example of I have employees that are quitting on me either because they're being overutilized or underutilized. Chuck, have you seen that in your role as a PM?
I was going to say this is actually a very common use case in today's consulting world in the project management space, right? Like the utilization of resources or people is critical, right? Is the work ready when the people are ready, or are the people available when the work's ready, right? So this is a common use case. And I love it specifically for this forum, right?
That's right. So in this case, we want to just understand it, like who is being overutilized, who's being underutilized, so who are we burning out and who are we making bored? So the first thing that you can see on the slide is just define your objective narrowly. You can always build it out. We have a saying called "Don't boil the ocean," is you're going to be watching it for a long time. So in this case, I encouraged the CFO just to focus on one KPI at a time. A KPI in our industry is a key performance indicator. So it's one that's going to be at the very top, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. The next thing we want to do out of this little blurb is we want to identify the information requirement. what does the CFO want? So as we read it, we can see that he wants utilization for billable employees. So that's important. So just in this one statement, this one small statement, I've been able to bring out 3 pretty big requirements where the CFO just tells you in passing or an elevator conversation, I really need to understand who we're burning out and who we're not. Well, here's what we've got. So in this case, we need to know who's billable. So if you're on the back end and your salary, we need to remove your hours out of the calculation. He wants it across all departments. So he wants it across his whole business. And then we have to somehow tie in HR and retention data, which could be potentially sensitive. So now we've introduced a potential security requirement. So I hope what this slide shows you is just a brief, I really need this, can start to layer in all these other levels that can be difficult. But if you know that ahead of time and going in, you can set up and prepare for that. The third thing that I always recommend to everybody before starting anything is, what is your success criteria? So if I provide this for you, CFO, here you go. These are the people you're burning out, and these are your board people. How do you know that I succeeded in giving that to you, right? So what are you going to do with that information? So in this case, he wants to decrease his hiring costs. So we know that once we provide this information, later on, I can do reports and analytics that say, have my hiring costs decreased over time because I'm leveling out how I'm utilizing my resources. I hope that's clear on this slide.
That was very clear, and I love the way you described that. And again, just like the real life application here, I think really matters. And I think a lot of times, CFOs aren't this descriptive, right? Like normally it's just like, hey, we need reporting around hiring, right? And you have to kind of lock them up in a room to really get down to this level of detail. I would be very impressed with the CFO that gave this level of detail, even in an elevator conversation, right? Like these 4 bullet points, I would be impressed if I got that in the elevator conversation. I would say, hey, that's something that the team can actually take away, size, and come back to you with realistic expectations on what does it take to build that report, right?
That's right. So let's go into that. So what I like to start with then is a workshop. And we bring in all the project stakeholders, your knowledge workers. I try to stay around this. Let me think here. Oh, well.
I'm just saying your subject.
You guys didn't invite to a workshop. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say subject matter experts, right? So anyone impacted by this report, right? So going back to your original statement of what are you going to do with the report? Are you going to have conversations with the head of HR? Are you going to have conversations with like a PMO director and, try to better leverage contingent workforce, meaning contracted labor from a billable standpoint, or your bench if you're a consulting firm, right? Like the associates that are salaried, but when you don't have active clients to assign them to, that's an overhead to your business, right? So I think getting any invested stakeholder, I think, is the right audience for a workshop, because you really want to get all of the nuance out on the table as part of this vignette, right? Like, and that way the development teams can truly size.
That's right. And the goal of this workshop at the end, and hopefully you'll see this, is you'll be able to get not only clear definitions, but also clear ownership. Who is going to own this data going forward in your organization? And then the other thing that I like to cover when we get business folks in is the business usage. How are you going to use this information going forward?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is an example of some outputs when I have my workshop. These are just general, but at a minimum, this is what you want to cover. You may have other items or data points that you want to cover for your organization, but at a minimum, this is the lowest common denominator. We need to get the intro. What is our goal? We want to identify how each role in the workshop is going to be affected and how they're expected to use the KPI. They may not know this coming into the workshop, which is fine, But these are kind of some prep things we want them to think about before they come in or as they're listening to the discussion. How is this going to affect what you do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? And how do we expect you to use it? So this is maybe a little bit of a different approach than here, go see this report and get what you need. Instead, our focus is going to be, look, we're taking the time to clearly define this key performance measure. We also want to discuss the best way to use it. So I'm not just throwing you at a bunch of different reports and hoping you find the information you need. Instead, we can kind of say, look, this is why we use this report and we're looking for this. Now, you have a brain, you have critical thinking. As you're then eventually using the report, you may find other nuggets or information to bring back to your management, which would be great. But at a minimum, we definitely want the business goal covered. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to delve into the metrics that support the KPI. Later in this presentation, I'm going to show you what I call a metric tree. And this is very important in estimating and in visually looking at the amount of work that you have to do. If you have any sample data, that's great. Bring it to the workshop. As you guys are defining your measures and testing out calculations, you can use your sample data, your real data, to see if you get what you expect. But that can also be optional at the first meeting. And then this is critical beyond belief. I call it the information accountability flow. And I'm also going to show you an example of that. But this is where you have the report. And we talked about this earlier in our introduction. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to use it going forward? And then what do you do if you need to bring something to somebody's attention? So that's really establishing that data accountability.
Yeah. I love that you brought up having sample data in a introductory conversation, because I find that most times clients don't bring that to the table, and they expect us as consultants or technology experts, but coming from the external, like outside of their organization, to somehow have in-depth knowledge to be able to give them, fixed bid estimates and things of that nature. When, we're saying to them, well, we haven't looked under the hood of the car yet, right? Like, we really don't know what we're dealing with here from a data standpoint. You're asking us to do things with data, but we don't know how clean that data is, meaning like, is it usable to be able to create tangible goods from? I find that a lot of times clients have reporting in place and the business has long abandoned it because it lacks accuracy. And you touched on this earlier. Who's going to own that data? Meaning, who's going to own the accuracy of that data from an operational standpoint? And I think that's such an overlooked element to data and reporting and analytics. Everyone thinks it's so simple. It's just like, oh, you just spit out a report. It's like, no, there's a whole governance piece operationally that has to be in place for an enterprise to trust what's being output.
Yeah, you're so right. And one of the things that I love about this approach that I use as well is the outputs do name that accountability. Who is that person that I can go to when I have a question about this information? So what we're touching on is, we finally have a workshop. We finally have the business folks and we have their time and we're in and we're focused. I don't want to go back to those folks later and say, hey, remember that workshop and we defined that metric, utilization review. Who's going to own it? Because then at that point, they're going to be like, I'm not going to own it. Or they're going to be like, right? Instead, let's have it in the whole room so everybody can agree and come to a consensus. And then when we publish our findings, we definitely publish who the data owners are. So then if there are any questions in the organization at that point, they can address them.
Yeah, that's a great approach. And that transparency really drives accountability.
That's right. So a few more what I consider critical fields when you're in your workshop and you're discussing your measures. Yeah. Okay. What I like about this slide, and when you use it in your workshop with the business, it also shows you why IT needs it. So a lot of times depending on your liaison between your business and your IT person, they may or may not explain, why people are asking certain things. If you don't have a liaison, then there definitely may not be any more information on why I'm asking you this question from an IT standpoint. So what you can see here is, the first thing is the definition of the indicator. And this is eventually, for me, if I'm doing this workshop, I want a definition that I can publish. Now, they may not be ready for that in the first workshop. That's fine. Let's try to get a definition that everybody can generally agree upon. Then we can give that would be an input into your data governance program. And then your data governors, your data stewards can then decide, okay, is that the best definition for the enterprise? But for now, what's the definition that the business and the technicians are going to agree upon that we can hand off to our data steward? Because IT then needs to label and input that into hopefully, you have an online business and technical dictionary. There's a lot of them in the industry right now that, do a great job with that. Then, of course, the calculation behind the definition. Again, and we're just going to publish it. This is how we do it. And then IT needs that as a guide for trusting the data so that when the report is presented, if there's any questions, we can look and see how the data is calculated. I like to add leading or lagging. So when we're talking about a measure, I want the business to think about, are we going to be proactive or reactive? So a leading indicator means, hey, this trend is now trending in a way that maybe I don't like, and I can maybe do something about it. Where most reporting for operational is lagging or historical, I can only look back and see what has happened, and then I'm in a very reactive mode. So I like to, as we're discussing them, try to come up with as many leading indicators so we can be as proactive as possible, especially when we talk about the data accountability. A lot of that information will come out. Is that making sense so far, Chuck?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. One of the things that you mentioned, though, in that description was the roles of data governors versus data stewards. What are the differences between those two roles, like stewards versus governors?
That's a good question. And the way that I meant it is the governors or the data governance is the actual process and policies that will come up from looking at the data. So those folks will be establishing maybe security policies or other type of information like that at the enterprise level. Your data steward, though, is going to be the person who's going to answer your direct question about that data element or that calculation.
Makes sense. No, it totally makes sense. And then the other thing that you touched upon was publishing information. I don't think people think about, outside of the reports being published, the information being used from a technology standpoint, as far as like, okay, if I'm doing research to build upon this later, right? What is that calculation? How is that published? Meaning, like, is it easy for me to understand as a developer, or do I have to really dig deep into the weeds to understand what is that telling me, right? I think that's a very overlooked, what we call technical debt in IT, right? Because a lot of times there's a lot of time spent from developers on researching things because the documentation is not crisp and clear, or they just can't look at the code base and easily understand what they're looking at to build net new things on top of that product.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And that's why I try to stress the difference between a business and a technical dictionary, because a lot of people just want the technical one. And that's fine if you even have that. Like to your point, do I even have anything I can give to my IT folks, that are supporting and maintaining it? But I do like to designate and delineate a business and a technical side, and then ideally marry them together.
Love it.
So the reason that this KPI is so important to the business is this, but then this is how we calculate it at the nitty-gritty database level.
Yeah.
And these are the business rules we've applied, and these are the security layers we've applied, and this is the semantic layer we've applied.
Yes.
So all of that can be captured in a business and technical dictionary.
Love it. I don't want to take
And
us too far down rabbit holes. I'm gonna let you continue, and then we'll kind of bring up some of the stuff at the end. But yeah, this
yeah,
is
that
great
sounds
stuff.
great. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Great. So as you're going through your measures and your calculations, what is your target value? You definitely want to pull out that, if I can get everybody, so, ideally we want everyone billable at 100%, right? But we know that people have meetings during the day and they have other things and they can't possibly, be on for 8 hours during a given day. That would be great if they can. So in my case, with this workshop, we decided that people would be available for 6.3 hours out of an 8-hour day. And you'll see that later. And that's great. So my ideal value would be, are you hitting your 6.3 hours every day? Great. But let's say you're going a little bit above and beyond, but you're not at burnout stage. So the target value lets us pick, this is what I need. But if there are people a little bit above, 10% is an acceptable threshold. And maybe I'll give them a bonus. But if they're starting to get to the 20% or 25 or even 30, then I need an alert, a notification, a trigger to let me know that, hey, this person is starting to maybe hit burnout stage. So we ask for those target values in IT so that we can set those thresholds for you. Now, ideally, as a report user, you could set the thresholds yourself. You could say, if somebody falls 10% below or above, let me know. But that would be, a more mature example. But in the meantime, if you're asking IT to build you a thing, give them an ideal value, and then give them some thresholds so they can build some notifications in for you. The business roles affected. This is important for a number of different reasons. Mostly it goes back into, this is how we want you to use the business so our business can move forward and move slowly. But from an IT standpoint, we need to know this, so if we have to add in any security layering.
Makes sense.
View by, pivot by, this is a reporting term. Generally speaking, when you're talking to the business, if they're like, oh yeah, I need to see this by geography and region and, org unit and division, they're going to start giving you all these different, what I call views or summary level or aggregate levels. That's fine. Just grab them, record them, because when you go to build your data layer, you'll know, okay, they also want to drill down, drill over, or drill up to these different business areas.
So I know what drilling down, drilling up, drilling over means. Can you put that into layman's terms for those that aren't as deep in the weeds for reporting?
Yeah, so a drill down, an easy example would be, I'm starting at a yearly summary level, and then I want to drill down into the quarter, and then I want to drill down into the month, and then I want to drill down into the day. So that's drilling down within a single dimension called time. So that's our time dimension I'm drilling down. But let's say I'm at the yearly level and I'm looking at the United States. Yearly level at the United States, Europe, and maybe Latin America. These are my numbers. So but now I want to drill down into the U.S. So I'm going to drill down into the U.S., just single out that number, the year, and then I'm going to drill into each of our states, right? Each of our 52 states. So then I can drill down that way. But then I was like, oh, wait a minute. I want to drill across over into Europe and compare at the country level or the different city-state level. It may not be the best example, but anyway, that would be drilling across, but then keeping that same level. I'm now not at the year. I've drilled down into states, the month, and I want to compare across. And then you can go back up. So let's say you're into a report, and you're down the day level, and you want to drill up to the week. Now show me the numbers at the week level or at the month level or at the quarter level.
Yep. Well stated. Thank you.
Do you think that was a good example?
Yeah, I think that was a great example.
Okay. All right. We'll see how that goes. And then the very last part. So you've defined your measure. You have the calculation. You know that it's going to make you pre-active. you know the value, the rows that are affected, and you know how they want to see it and how they're going to slice and dice it, drill it up and down and across, then who owns it? And we cannot stress enough who is going to be owning this data. Again, it's the final go-to person when there's a question about that data element. Great. So now we have some real-world definitions and examples that came out of a workshop that I had recently. I'm going to genericize it, though, to protect the IP of the company. But these are actual outputs of a Vignette workshop I had with a CFO and his direct reports over a 4-day period. It may seem obvious, but I feel like these columns and data points are critical because, like we said before, they'll be the start of your data governance and security initiatives. And know that these outputs are designed to feed a data dictionary. We talked about definitions. So the definition that they came up with was let me rephrase. So the KPI that we decided to define in our first workshop was actual utilization. So we wanted to know how we were actually utilizing a resource on a project, right? Because we need to know if we're burning them out, under burning them, so we can retain them from an HR standpoint. So the definition, it was real simple. They came on, we just need the percentage of available time that is used for billable work. The calculation then is your actual billed hours over available calendar hours. Calendar hours is important because as an IT person, I have to remove all of the weekends, all of the company holidays, all of that sort of thing. I know as a project manager, Chuck, you have your project manager calendars, right? And a lot of them have those built in where they remove those hours for you. But we need to know that we're excluding those hours when the people, for our calculation. And they also decided that in an 8-hour day, we only need you billable for 7.2. So that was their threshold. 7.2 out of an 8-hour day. Ideally, we would like you to be billable. So in my example here, if you have a 100% target utilization, if you worked 6 hours on normal business day, then your 6 hours out of 7.2 is 83%. So you're 83% billable on that day. I want you at 100, but by the end of the week, maybe you worked 8 hours on one day instead of 7.2. But the point is they have a business rule, and their business rule was you have to be available 7.2 hours out of every day. Now, they also are including certain employment types, which are full-time, part-time, W-2, and independent contractors. So you can see just in the calculation, we already have 2 business roles, right? The 7.2 and the employment type. And then we also have the target number, which we want you to be at 100% in this case.
Makes sense.
Thanks. Okay, so as we went on to tying back to the critical fields that we need for this measure, we already talked about the target value being 100%. Now we're going to go into, so when I asked the CFO, so who's going to be affected by this number in your organization? And this is the list. So it's a big list. So just this one measure is going to affect their finance director, a finance analyst, the CFO, the COO, the sales VPs, the resource managers, the project managers, and then, of course, the billable employee themselves. And we're probably actually missing a role here of HR. But with our focus for this vignette, we had not tied in the retention part yet. We were just focusing on defining and how we're going to use actual utilization. And then I have a tab where you can tie that out when you do your accountability flow. have I made each of these people accountable at these different levels for this measure, or if I missed somebody? So that's a good way to know if you're missing a business review process as well.
Gotcha.
And then the view by, pivot by, they wanted to see their actual numbers versus their planned. So they're going to be a little bit proactive, and they need it for all business units. So now I know as a technician that I can't just give you data at the geography level. You also want your organization, because you've told me you want all business units. So I can now start to think ahead as a technician of, okay, I need to bring in, business unit data as well as geography as well as. And then with our final column, we said, okay, who's going to own this data? So you can see all the roles above. Is it the finance director? Is it the analyst? Is it the PM? Who's going to own this data? And in this case, this company said the director is going to own it. So the director of finance will own actual utilization. If you have any questions, they may delegate to their finance analyst, but they are ultimately going to be the person to answer the question about the data.
Makes sense.
Okay. So we've talked about a lot. I feel like I've given a lot of information, and now I just want to kind of level set, where are we right now? And then I want to maybe tie it all together with some cool visuals so you can really see, what it is we're talking about and how it comes together and what we ultimately want to try to achieve. So up till now, we've discussed, what is a vignette in our definition? How do we use it in a workshop setting? And then what are our expected outputs? So we've covered that there are 5 generic outputs from the vignette. And then we gave a real-world example of one of them from the metrics tab. I'm going to skip over sample data and the business goals because those are business-specific items that I want to keep those protected. But now let's go into our visuals. I think these, I don't know about you, Chuck, when you saw them for the first time, but I think these kind of show it all.
Yep. Sorry.
That's right.
Skip ahead.
Yep. So if we go to the metric tree, we know as report technicians that our key performance indicators made up of 3 different levels of data. Our CFO may not know that. Our PMs may not know that, but we do. And a KPI, key performance indicators, made up of strategic data, tactical data, and then operational data. Quickly, what does that mean? So as you can see in the visual, the operational data, which is at the bottom level, is going to be the data from your back-end system. This is going to be how many hours I'm billing every day on a weekly basis. So that's just straight numbers in, numbers out. Operational data. We usually call them list reports or grid view. You'll see a lot of those type of just the nitty gritty. What am I doing day by day by day? Very reactive. Operational is just reactive, just is what it is. This is what I'm doing every day with my systems. Tactical, you get a little bit more into your trends. Now I'm starting to look at my operational data over time, over a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, and I'm now applying business rules. So the operational level, data in, data out, very little cleaning, very little business rules. But now tactically, I do need to start applying business rules to understand my business. And so you can see that level. So examples of tactical measures might be a timesheet adjustment, right? I inputted something wrong. I fat fingered it. I need to tell my PM I messed up. They need to go in and adjust it. Fine. Another good example is leakage. So leakage from a standpoint, I don't even know. I don't have a good example. I'll have to come up with that. I don't know. And then you start to apply other business rules, as you can see on that tactical level. And then you get into your strategic level. So then I pull my operational data, I apply my tactical business rules, and now I can see my resources and how they're actually being utilized.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in this example, we also added another KPI because we realized in our workshop as we were going through, I also needed data from my my timesheet and my billing, or sorry, my timesheet and my project system. So we came in with actual and then booked so they could compare and get to their leading and lagging examples that they wanted to get to.
So one of the things that you touched on in this, and I've always found fascinating in reporting projects, is the concept of there was data that, we ingested yesterday coming from various different sources. And to your point, there's an adjustment or we receive partial data, right? And what do you do when you now are manipulating reports that we issued yesterday with new data? Like, how's the business when they handle that? Especially if this report feeds other systems, right? Like, that's where it gets really complex. And again, like, why I wanted to do a reporting segment is because I think everyone thinks the reporting is the most simplest things. And it's honestly one of the most complex things in every project you do. And it's always an afterthought, always.
Yeah, it is. And in your example happens a lot. So we have to talk about, cutoff times. Mm-hmm. And we just need to let people know that if you're ingesting information from a system that is constantly improving, mm-hmm. right? Like in your example, I'm adding more data. I have an adjustment. Now that number I reported a week ago is different. Depending on the business and the business purpose, we can set up the reporting. So now you're getting into an as is, as was situation, mm-hmm. or an as is situation. And that can really complicate things. So whenever people bring up, I want to see the most accurate number as of today, that's easier than I want to see the number as I reported it a week ago. Because then what you're keeping history snapshots of everything as it looked when it changes, if that makes sense. So if I input a number of 10 and then a week later I go back and I adjust it to 8. Well, when I ran the report, it said 10, but if I run the report now, today, after adjustment, it will say 8. But if I pull that up and I'm like, wait, it was 10, now it's 8, what is correct? That is a very important conversation to have with the business, because really 8 is correct. That is the correct number. It's the best number we know. It's been adjusted. So a lot of times with finance, we'll have a cutoff time, no adjustments after, or we say the reports are in flux and you don't get your final number until day 15, mm-hmm. or day 10 or day 7, or whatever that day is after the cutoff into the next month, that the numbers are not going to change.
Yeah. But valuable conversation.
It's very rare that I found a situation where I needed to know that minute the exact right number. Usually for finance and reporting, it can go a month. Usually it's at the monthly level.
Yeah. I've seen it all.
It just all depends on the scenario.
Agreed. You and I have both worked for retailers in the past, and some things retailers want to see in real time, right? And other things, to your point, a day in arrears or a monthly snapshot is totally okay. It just depends on the business user and the scenario.
Yeah, that's right. So getting back to our metric tree, what it shows is a lot of information. So wouldn't it be nice if your CFO said, hey, in a, hallway conversation, I really want to know why we keep burning out people, losing good people. I want this. You could say, sure, this is what I need, right? So what was nice about the workshop and what came out of it is the work involved and what we need to do. So when I laid it out for them and broke it down and said, okay, what we found is we have additional business rules that will affect reporting, which is on the right. And these are rules that they already knew about, that they pulled out and that I took a note of. So how do we deal with resources that are booked 125%, right? We had that conversation. What do we do if they're less than 25% booked? So those were business rules that came into, well, I don't know, sorry, I'm losing it. And then on the left, we realized that we needed to pull in additional data from projects and forecasting. So now I'm not only just pulling data from my timesheet system, I'm pulling data from our project and forecasting system. Mm-hmm. So if I want to produce actual utilization, I need at least 2 different systems to produce that measure. And that's what we're trying to show with our metric tree. What we noticed is we needed another KPI, which we talked about in the previous slide, to get a leading employee retention number for HR. In summary, you can see that actual utilization, that metric is dependent on a minimum of 9 other metrics. So on your metrics tab, so on your metrics tab, you'll have 9 total entries for this one KPI. Again, we may have additional data to pull out, and then we start to uncover business rules. So I think when you can get to this, then you can get to a picture of, okay, this is what's involved. It's not that scary, and there aren't any surprises. So when you come out of the workshop, you may not still have every nitty gritty, like we had the 80-20 rule. We may not know the 20% that's really difficult, but I know that I'm going to need timesheet data. I already know I have some business rules. I know who my data owner is. So when I leave this workshop, then I can just work directly with that data owner for them to tell me that, yes, you have the measure correct. This is what I expect. Now let's re-release it to the other business units that were involved. So does that kind of make sense and how that ties it all together?
It does. And to your point, the visualization of this is really what gets business teams all the way there. And you also touched on the fact that these become, gotcha moments later on if you don't capture this up front for the IT development team, right? Because the ask can stay too high level. And the reality is the business needs to understand all these moving dynamics and pieces. And to your point, the parts that they own from a data governance and stewardship standpoint.
And I know if people like our podcast chat, one of the things we have coming up, one of the ideas we've been talking about is why estimating is so difficult. But this also helps with estimating. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can tell you, I can't tell you, but I can go to my IT person and say, hey, how hard is it to get timesheet data out? This is what I need, right? And they can tell me. So I can start to estimate from this as well.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Now, the next slide we're going to cover is the accountability flow. And I think this one is equally as important as the metric tree. And this is the one that really engages your business, really gets them involved as to, where their pain points are and where they need data. And then, if we have the right players in the workshop who know these different things, awesome. If not, when we release the data, we start to capture it. I used it in this way, and this is what was, the way. But ideally, we could say this is how we expect our project managers, our resource managers, our staffable resource to use this metric, if you will. So in this case, the PM is going to do a monthly check for some different things. For opportunity bookings with start dates in the past, he's going to do his PM thing. If he finds it, then he's going to do a thing, right? So that's all this accountability is showing is with our one resource number and KPI, these are all the things that people are going to do with it. And then, obviously if an issue is found at the weekly check, then they let people know. Mm-hmm. So I love this because, what it shows is accountability to every level. So my staffable resource must submit their time weekly. If they don't, and that's at the very front, then it's going to throw everything else out. My PM must weekly approve the data, or that's going to mess up the flow. Mm-hmm. So I love the accountability flow, and it really just gets people engaged. And then it may even uncover other different information pain points or data areas. And then to your point, Chuck, we can set that aside as potential tech debt or data debt, for a later project or for a phase 2.
Yeah, agreed. And I often talk about accountability. Some people close to me would say it's my favorite word, and this is the reason why. Is because things don't work right. To your point, one lack of accountability in the workflow breaks the whole process, right? And then people say, "Well, it doesn't work." It's like, no, maybe someone didn't do what they signed up to do in the first place, right? That's what broke the reporting. The technology works, the operations were broken, right? And there's a synergy between the two when you're talking about data, business intelligence, reporting, alerting, etc., right?
Yes, yes. And so what I love about the accountability flow, and on this next slide that you went to, is it does reveal all these different tech things that need to be covered, or to your point, that it's going to appear broken. So what we see is, they expect monthly reports. They expect a weekly report. I've already identified 1, 2, 3, at least 3 notifications that I'm going to have to code in and test and make sure it works the way we expect. So what's interesting for me then is, out of this workshop that we did, we actually, that's not right, 400 total measure. Oh, yeah, that's right. So we eventually came up with 9 KPIs for this client. You saw the first one that I broke down for actual utilization. They actually had 8 more. And by the time we broke them all down, I had 400 total measures to support 9 KPIs. So, with all these different nuances. So each one had their alerts, had their reports, had their drill downs, had their expected drill across. They had all the different things. And again, it may seem like a lot of information, but if you can show the business from an IT standpoint, this is why we're asking the questions. We're just trying to get to this picture of the work that's involved, so that everybody can understand that it's not just one little measure we're trying to put on the screen. There's so many layers, there's so many testings. And if you want to be proactive, that's great. And we want that too. But every proactive event also leads to testing, right? And quality before you can actually publish the information, the data.
Yeah. And go.
So ideally, when you go through the workshop, it will help reduce any kind of rework, turnaround time. And then you can also, it may even uncover business priorities, right? Or more pressing priorities too. Like, we don't need actual utilization anymore. We don't even understand, blah, 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 right? Or whatever that particular event may be.
Yeah. And what it drives is accountability within the project team too, right? Because these become our documented requirements. This becomes documented of what the developer is going to build. This becomes our documentation, what the testing team is going to test, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what we estimate against. And it really does drive accountability towards timelines and budgets when you're delivering technology solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, we're just about at time. Just some final kind of tips and thoughts. We really hope that today's presentation has outlined the art and science behind meaningful information requirements. Really, my Vignette methodology is just geared as a useful tool to help facilitate requirement processes between business and IT. We mentioned before that if you like what Chuck and I did today, we would love to provide another podcast on why estimating IT work is so difficult. I do have, again, from an information reporting standpoint, I do have an estimating methodology that also outlines why things take as long as they do. But if you like what you saw, read, hear from today, please let Chuck, Scott Q Consulting know. We definitely appreciate reviews, feedbacks, likes, and then I can be reached at my LinkedIn, Robin Hill, and then I also have the LinkedIn on the presentation if you're watching this through video.
Yeah, and even if anyone listening out there is thinking about doing a reporting project, is just looking for some consultation services, even a workshop. Like Robin mentioned, this can be 1 to maybe possibly 4 day, depending on the size and the enterprise of the ask, but something that, consultants like myself, like Robin, can come in and support and help you get this all down on paper so that as a company, you understand what you're asking for, what the cost associated with it would be, what it takes to implement something like that, not only from a implementation standpoint, but then to maintain it from an operational standpoint. And that's going to take internal stakeholders basically buying into additional ongoing production support work, right? But this is the kind of fun stuff that we do all day long. And Robin, I don't know about you, but I find in my personal network outside of IT, nobody understands what I do all day. So it's very fun for me to get on podcasts like this with colleagues like yourself, who we work cross-functionally together at different clients over the years. We get together and talk shop about this kind of stuff over coffee. Like, we understand the complexity. I think a lot of people outside of IT don't really understand why it costs so much, why it takes so much time to build things of this level of complexity. Again, the concept is it's just a report. How could it possibly take 3-6 months to build something like that? And 400 use cases later, you understand why.
Exactly. That's right. Awesome. Well, I know I had a lot of fun today. Thank you, Chuck, for setting this up. And I hope that our listeners and our watchers are able to get something meaningful from this today.
Yeah, this is beautiful. And thank you again, Robin. Always a pleasure spending time with you, talking shop, talking life. We didn't even get into some of the human interest things that we do outside of technology, but we'll make sure to include that in the next one. All right.
Sounds great.
All right.
See you then.
Bye.